My best friend killed herself. Now, she's not gone. She's just angry I'm still here. And she's making it very clear I need to join her.
My name is Astra. For years, Rara and I were inseparable, two halves of a single whole, navigating the chaotic landscape of university life and early adulthood as a united front. We shared everything from lecture notes and secrets to dreams that felt too fragile to voice to anyone else. Our tiny apartment, a mess of textbooks and coffee mugs, was a sanctuary where we promised each other we would conquer the world, or at least survive our 20s with our sanity intact. I can still hear her laughter echoing off those walls, a sound so full of life it now feels like a cruel joke played by the universe, a haunting melody from a time when I believed our bond was unbreakable. That belief was the foundation of my entire existence, a comforting certainty that shattered into a million piercing shards the moment I learned she was gone. A tragedy that unfolded on an evening I replayed in my mind 1,000 times. The evening I failed to answer her final desperate call. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday night, a night I had selfishly dedicated to cramming for a midterm exam I was terrified of failing. My phone vibrated insistently on the desk, Rara's name flashing on the screen, but I silenced it with a frustrated sigh, promising myself I would call her back the second I finished this chapter. The world outside my bubble of anxiety ceased to exist, including the growing silence from her side of our apartment that should have been a deafening alarm. When I finally put my books away an hour later, the missed call notification felt like a minor oversight, not a lifeline I had carelessly ignored. I sent a lazy text, "Sorry, swamped with studying, what's up?" and waited for a reply that never came. I went to bed assuming she was just asleep or annoyed at me, constructing a dozen mundane explanations in my head, each one a flimsy barrier against the horrifying truth that was already settling over our home like a shroud. The police visit the next morning ripped away any semblance of normalcy forever. Two officers with somber faces asked if I was Rara's roommate, their presence alone confirming a deep, primal fear I didn't know I possessed. They told me she'd been found in the old storage loft of her family's house, a place we used to play in as kids, a place that had now become her tomb. The word suicide hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and leaving me dizzy and disoriented, the world tilting on its axis into a new, horrifying reality where Rara no longer existed. The officer's voice became a distant murmur as I pictured her there, alone in the dark, and the memory of her missed call transformed from a simple regret into a branding iron of guilt, searing its mark directly onto my soul. I was the last person she tried to reach, and I'd been too busy, too preoccupied with my own trivial concerns to pick up the phone. The weeks after the funeral were a blur of hollow condolences and suffocating silence. I dropped out of my classes, unable to concentrate on anything but the gaping hole where Rara used to be. Our apartment, once a place of warmth and shared dreams, became a prison of memories. Every object a trigger for a fresh wave of anguish. I started sleeping on the couch because facing her empty bedroom was too painful, and I avoided mirrors because my own reflection, pale, haunted, and drowning in guilt, was a face I could no longer recognize. The grief was a heavy, tangible thing, a constant companion that whispered accusations in my ear every waking moment. But it was a human sorrow, something I, in my broken state, could almost understand. I had no idea that this profound but natural grief was merely the calm before a storm of a much more sinister and personal nature was about to be unleashed upon my shattered life. It began subtly, a week after the funeral, with the phone. I was huddled on the couch drowning in my own misery when my phone suddenly rang shrill and jarring in the oppressive silence. I fumbled for it, my heart leaping into my throat, and felt a cold dread wash over me when I saw the caller ID. It was Rara's name, clear as day, illuminated on the screen. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible. A glitch, a cruel mistake by the telecom company that had yet to deactivate her number. But a deeper, more instinctual part of me knew better as I stared at the screen, paralyzed by a terror so complete it froze the blood in my veins. This was no technical error, this was a message, a direct and terrifying communication from beyond the grave, and the relentless ringing felt less like a sound and more like an accusation, a demand for an answer I could no longer give. I never answered that call. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, had hovered over the screen until the ringing ceased, leaving a silence that was somehow more deafening and terrifying than the noise itself. I spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife, my eyes darting between my dark phone screen and the darker shadows in the corners of the room, each one seeming to pulse with a malevolent presence. The logical part of my brain, the part that had aced exams and paid bills on time, tried to rationalize it. A prank, a sick joke by someone who knew she was gone, a network error of cosmic proportions. But the part of me that had shared a soul with Rara knew with a chilling certainty that it was her. The specific ringtone I'd assigned to her, the way the phone had vibrated with the same unique pattern it always had, it was all a signature I couldn't deny. The call had not been a plea for help. The tone had felt different, charged with a static anger, a final furious attempt to bridge a gap I had created. And its failure to connect seemed to have granted her a new spectral form of access to my world. The digital hauntings escalated with a cruel intelligence that systematically dismantled my sanity. The next morning, my laptop, sitting closed on the coffee table, suddenly chimed with the distinct sound of an incoming video call from Rara's old account. I watched in paralyzed horror as the screen lit up by itself, the interface opening to show my own wide-eyed, terrified face in the small preview window. But the main screen remained a chilling, impenetrable black. Then a message popped up in our old chat log, a log I hadn't had the heart to delete, time-stamped just seconds ago. You always ignored me when you were studying. The words were a precise, targeted blow, referencing the very night she died, a detail no prankster could possibly know with such intimate accuracy. It was followed by a file transfer, an image that downloaded automatically onto my desktop, a slightly blurred, off-center photo of me taken from behind as I stood at our kitchen counter that very morning, a ghostly snapshot from a perspective that should have been impossible. She wasn't just contacting me, she was here, in the apartment, watching me with a cold, unseen eye. The terror soon bled from the digital world into the physical, becoming a tangible force within the walls of our home. I started noticing a specific faint scent of jasmine, the perfume Rara always wore, lingering in the hallway outside her closed bedroom door. A sweet, cloying smell that would appear and vanish without any logical source. One night I was jolted awake by a sound that turned my blood to ice, the distinct, rhythmic creak of the rocking chair in her room, a sound I hadn't heard since she was alive. I huddled under my blankets praying for it to stop, but it only grew louder, more aggressive, as if someone was rocking back and forth with furious, violent intent. When I finally mustered the courage to fling her bedroom door open, the chair was still, dust motes dancing in the moonlight, but the air was frigid and thick with the smell of jasmine. The message was clear. The boundary between my world and hers was dissolving, and her anger was no longer confined to phone lines and Wi-Fi signals. It was now a physical presence sharing my space, a roommate from hell I could never evict. Driven by a desperate need for human connection and a flicker of hope that I was simply losing my mind, I decided to visit Rara's family home, a place I hadn't been able to face since the funeral. I needed to see her mother, to feel the grounding weight of shared grief, to confirm that the world outside my apartment was still sane. The journey there was a haze of anxiety, but stepping into the familiar living room with its framed photos of a smiling Rara offered a fleeting, painful comfort. Her mother, eyes red-rimmed but composed, held my hands, and we spoke of happier memories. But as I was leaving, standing in the front hallway, my eyes drifted to the narrow, closed door that led up to the storage loft, the place where it happened. A wave of dizziness hit me, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. A fleeting, dark silhouette, the unmistakable shape of someone hanging, projected for a split second against the white door. I gasped and stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked again, it was gone, but the afterimage was burned into my vision. Rara hadn't just followed me, she had led me here, to the epicenter of her pain, to show me that her presence was not tied to our apartment, but to me, personally and inescapably. Returning to my apartment that evening felt like walking into a cage. The brief respite I had felt at her mother's house had vanished, replaced by a deeper, more profound terror. The hauntings were no longer random occurrences. They were a conscious, intelligent campaign of torment. She was proving her point with brutal efficiency. She could reach me anywhere. As I locked the door behind me, leaning against it in exhaustion, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with a shaking hand, already knowing what I would see. It was a new text message from her number. It contained no words, only a single stark image, a close-up photo of the hallway in her family's house, focused on that same white door to the loft, taken from the exact spot where I had been standing when I saw the apparition. The timestamp on the photo was from just an hour ago. A silent scream caught in my throat. She wasn't just haunting me, she was documenting my torment, showing me that her perspective and mine were now horrifically intertwined. The investigation was over. The verdict was in. I was guilty, and my sentence was to be a prisoner in a world she now ruled, a world where the dead were very, very angry.
The photo of the white door to the loft, timestamped from the exact moment of my visitation, shattered any last illusion that I was dealing with a simple, location-bound ghost. This was a predator of the psyche, one that stalked me through both the physical and digital worlds, documenting my terror for its own cruel amusement. I spent the next day in a catatonic state, jumping at every notification sound from my phone, which I had now taken to keeping on silent, its screen facing down like a treacherous eye I dared not meet. The apartment, once a place of grief, was now a landscape of pure dread. Every shadow seemed to hold her silhouette. Every faint noise from the pipes mimicked the rhythmic creak of that damned rocking chair. I started talking to myself, muttering reassurances that sounded hollow even to my own ears. It's just stress. You're hallucinating. This isn't real. But the chillingly specific evidence, the photo, the texts, was a cold, hard anchor dragging me down into a reality where the impossible was now my daily life. My desperation for a rational explanation led me to the one place I thought might hold answers: the university library's archives of old local newspapers. If Rara's spirit was this powerful, this vengeful, perhaps her death wasn't the simple suicide it seemed. Maybe there was a darker history to her family's house, a tragedy that predated her own and was now using her as a vessel. The walk to the library was an ordeal in itself. Every passerby felt like a potential mask for something inhuman. Every reflection in a shop window threatened to show not my face, but hers. The archives were in the basement, a silent, dusty cavern filled with the smell of aging paper. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, a pressure on the back of my neck that made the fine hairs stand on end. As I pulled a heavy-bound volume of newspapers from the 1980s from the shelf, a sudden, Arctic chill swept through the aisle, and the pages began to flutter as if turned by an unseen hand, stopping abruptly on a specific yellowed page. My blood ran cold. The page was open to an obituary section, but one article had been circled, not with ink, but with what looked like a faint, smudged fingerprint of dust. The headline read, "Young woman found in family home." The details were eerily, horrifyingly familiar. It described a woman named Eleanor from the same address where Rara had died, who had taken her own life in the very same storage loft decades earlier.
The method was identical. This was no coincidence. This was a pattern, a cycle of tragedy that Rara had unknowingly repeated. As I read a single crisp page, a student's forgotten lined notepaper drifted down from the top shelf and landed on the open book. Scrawled in a frantic, familiar handwriting that I knew as well as my own were the words, "It's a tradition. You're next." The air left my lungs. This wasn't just Rara's anchor anymore. It felt older, darker, as if the house itself had a hunger, and Rara was its newest instrument, beckoning me to become part of its grim legacy. I fled the archives, my heart hammering against my ribs, the words, "You're next," burning in my mind. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly until I found myself at a crowded shopping mall, seeking refuge in the noise and the anonymous sea of people. I bought a coffee I didn't want and sat on a bench in the central atrium, watching families and friends laugh, their normalcy a painful contrast to my unraveling world. For a few minutes, the buzz of life was a shield. Then, the large central fountain, a spectacle of dancing water and colored lights, suddenly sputtered and died. In the ensuing silence, the mall's background music became audible. It was a pop song, one that Rara and I had hated, always joking that it was our anti-anthem. And then the singer's voice distorted, warping and slowing down into a deep, guttural groan that resolved into a single, whispered word that seemed to emanate from the mall's speakers themselves. Astra. The people around me continued shopping, oblivious. The message was for me alone. There was no sanctuary, not in silence, not in crowds. She was in the very fabric of the world around me. I finally returned to my apartment as night fell, my body trembling with a fatigue that went bone deep. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of a world that had become a funhouse of horrors. As I fumbled with my keys at the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new wave of nausea washed over me. I didn't want to look, but the compulsion was too strong. It was a notification from a cloud storage account Rara and I had shared for group projects. A single file had been updated. Its name was ourfutureplans.pdf. With a trembling finger, I opened it. The document we had once filled with dreams of traveling together, of starting a business, was gone. In its place was a new, starkly formatted list. The title was Final Arrangements. Below it were bullet points: location, the loft, method, the tradition, and finally, a blank line next to name where my own name had been typed in a bold, accusing font. I slid down the wall to the floor, the fight draining out of me. She wasn't just haunting me. She was making plans, and I was the guest of honor. The Final Arrangements document broke something inside me. The haunting was no longer a series of terrifying events. It was a premeditated sentence, and I was simply awaiting my execution date. A strange, numb acceptance settled over my bones, colder than any phantom chill. I stopped trying to rationalize it, stopped seeking escape. My world shrunk to the four walls of my apartment, which now felt less like a prison and more like a waiting room. I stopped answering calls from concerned friends and my family, their voices full of a mundane worry that seemed to belong to a different universe. A universe where ghosts didn't draft your suicide note for you. I existed in a liminal space, drifting from room to room, my own reflection in the windows, a pale, hollow-eyed stranger I barely recognized. The fear was still there, a constant hum in the background, but it was now overshadowed by an immense, crushing fatigue. The fight had gone out of me. Rara was winning. This surrender seemed to grant her even more power, as if my resignation was the key she needed to fully manifest. The phenomena became more brazen, more physical. I'd wake up with deep, ugly scratches on my arms, though I had no memory of dreaming, let alone hurting myself. Objects would fly off shelves with violent force, not just fall. A book hurled across the room, a plate shattering against the wall opposite the counter. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe, and the smell of jasmine became so constant, it clung to my clothes and hair,
a sickening perfume that marked me as hers. The worst was the whispering. It started as a faint rustle at the edge of my hearing, but soon coalesced into a voice. Rara's voice, but distorted, stretched thin with static and malice. It didn't speak in sentences, just fragments that drilled directly into my brain. Alone. Tradition. Join me. The voice was a needle of ice in my ear, a constant tormenting reminder that my solitude was an illusion. I was never alone. The climax of this physical torment came on a night when the rain lashed against the windows like thousands of tapping fingers. I was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm and the whispers intertwine, when the bedroom door began to shake. Not a creak, but a violent rattling shudder, as if someone was throwing their whole weight against it from the other side. I curled into a ball, squeezing my eyes shut, praying for it to stop. It didn't. The rattling grew more frantic, and then I heard it. The sound of the doorknob turning. My eyes snapped open. Through the gloom, I saw the knob rotate fully, first one way, then the other. The lock mechanism clicked. With a slow, agonizing groan, the door swung inward, revealing the pitch-black maw of the bedroom. Standing in the doorway was a silhouette, darker than the darkness behind it. It had no distinct features, but its shape was undeniably Rara's. It stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity, simply watching me. Then it raised an arm, a single slender finger extending to point directly at me, before it dissolved back into the shadows. The door slammed shut. The next morning, a grim resolve cut through the numbness. If I was going to be forced to join this tradition, I would at least know why. I had to go back to the source, the loft. I drove to Rara's family home, which stood empty and foreboding under a gray sky. Using a key her mother had given me to water the plants, I let myself in. The air inside was stale and freezing. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the door under the stairs and climbed the pull-down ladder into the loft. The space was filled with covered furniture and memory-filled boxes, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light from the single grimy window. And then I saw it. On the main beam, the one the newspaper article from decades ago had mentioned, faint scratches were visible under a layer of dust. I moved closer, my heart pounding. They weren't random. They were dates, followed by initials. EW, 1982. RK, 2024. Rara's initials. And next to them, freshly etched into the wood as if done by an invisible fingernail, were two new letters. AS. My initials. A choked sob escaped me. This was the proof. The tradition was real, and my name was already carved into its history. As I stood there, trembling before that terrible ledger of death, my phone buzzed. I didn't need to look to know who it was, but I did. It was a final message from Rara's number. No text, no image, just a voice memo. I pressed play, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. For a second, there was only static. Then, Rara's voice, clear and filled with a sadness so profound it ached, but underneath it was that same undeniable thread of anger. You promised we'd always be together. You left me alone up here. It's so cold, Astra, it's dark. You have to keep your promise. It's your turn.
The voice memo didn't feel like a threat anymore. It felt like a summons. A dreadful clarity settled over me, quieting the whispers and stilling the flying objects. The chaos had been her trying to get my attention. Now that she had it, a chilling peace descended upon the apartment. The frantic energy was replaced by a patient, inexorable pull, like a tide drawing me out to sea. I stopped fighting. I stopped feeling afraid. A strange, hollow calm filled the space where my terror had been. I moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker, my actions feeling both distant and preordained. I knew what was expected of me. The final arrangements document, the initials on the beam, they were not warnings, they were an itinerary. My life was no longer my own. It was a closing chapter in a story Rara had finished writing for both of us. I began to prepare, not with the frenzy of a victim, but with the methodical acceptance of a prisoner on death row. I cleaned the apartment meticulously, wiping away every trace of the struggle, every fingerprint of the paranormal. It wasn't for me. It was for whoever would find this place afterward. I didn't want them to see the mess. I wrote a series of letters to my parents, to a few close friends. I didn't mention Rara or ghosts. I wrote about overwhelming grief, about the unbearable weight of guilt, about how I just couldn't find a way to keep going. They were lies, but they were plausible lies, the kind that would bring a sad, tidy closure to the living. I left them in a neat stack on the coffee table. As I sealed the last envelope, a profound sense of relief washed over me. The decision was made. The struggle was over. The constant, gnawing fear was gone, replaced by the cold comfort of surrender. The night I chose felt appropriate, dark, moonless, and silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't pack a bag. I simply stood, walked out of the apartment, and locked the door behind me for the last time. The drive to Rara's family home was surreal. The streets were empty, the traffic lights blinking yellow in the void. I wasn't driving, I was being pulled, a marionette on an invisible string. I felt Rara's presence not as a hostile force, but as a companion in the passenger seat, a silent guide leading me home. The headlights cut through the darkness, not illuminating a path forward, but tracing the route of a predetermined destiny. There was no hesitation, no last-minute doubt. My hands were steady on the wheel. This was the only thing left to do, the final logical step in a sequence that began the moment I ignored her call. The old house loomed ahead, a darker silhouette against the night sky. I parked and walked to the front door, the key cold in my hand. The air was still and frigid. As I turned the key in the lock, I didn't feel a ghostly chill. I felt a wave of welcome, an energy that sighed with relief. The door swung open into the profound blackness of the foyer. I didn't need a light. I knew the way. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor as I walked past the silent living room, past the photographs of a smiling Rara, toward the door under the stairs. I reached up, my fingers finding the familiar cold metal of the pull cord for the loft ladder. It descended with a groan that shattered the sacred silence of the house. I climbed. Each rung felt like a step toward a terrible, long-awaited reunion. The loft was exactly as I had left it, yet completely transformed. The dust motes seemed to glow with a faint ethereal light, illuminating the space like a cathedral. The beam with the carved initials stood as an altar at the far end. And there, standing before it, was Rara. She wasn't a shadow or a silhouette. She was solid, real, wearing the same clothes from the last time I saw her alive. She wasn't the grotesque, angry specter that had haunted me. She was just Rara. But her eyes held a deep, infinite sadness that stretched into eternity. She didn't speak, but she smiled. A small, heartbreaking smile of welcome. She extended her hand. There was no rope, no noose, only her invitation. The last of my resistance melted away.
This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about a promise. A final, desperate act of friendship. I took a step forward, my hand rising to meet hers. The whispers in my mind coalesced into a single clear thought. It's time to come home. And in that moment, stepping into the embrace of my best friend, I knew it was.
My hand hovered in the air, inches from Rara's. Her touch felt like the promise of an end to the relentless pain, a final silence after months of screaming terror. The cold of the loft wasn't biting anymore. It was bracing, clarifying. This was the culmination of everything. The missed call, the haunting, the carved initials, it had all led to this single, decisive moment of reunion. Her eyes, those pools of familiar warmth now layered with an ancient sorrow, held mine, and I felt an overwhelming pull to just let go, to step across the threshold and keep the promise I had failed to keep in life. The weight of my guilt could finally be lifted. It would be so easy. But as my fingertips began to bridge that final, tiny gap, a violent, discordant sound ripped through the sanctified silence of the loft. The ringtone, her ringtone, the one that had started this nightmare, blared from my phone in my pocket, shockingly loud and jarringly mundane. The spell shattered. Rara's form flickered, a scowl of pure, undiluted fury distorting her features for a split second before the image of my peaceful friend returned, more strained now. The phone kept ringing, an insistent, mechanical lifeline thrown into the spiritual abyss. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my pocket. I didn't understand. She was the one calling me. How could she be here, offering her hand, and also be the source of the ringtone? The logical disconnect was like a bucket of ice water. I fumbled for the phone, my eyes locked on Rara's now impatient figure. The caller ID didn't say Rara. It said, Mom. The real, living, breathing world was crashing my private seance. A sob caught in my throat. I didn't answer, but I didn't decline the call either. I just stood there, holding the vibrating phone, staring at the ghost of my best friend, torn between two realities. The loft began to change. The ethereal light dimmed, and the temperature plummeted to a painful, bone-deep freeze. Rara's patient smile vanished, replaced with a mask of bitter betrayal. You always choose someone else, her voice echoed in my mind, no longer sad, but scalding with rage. The air thickened, pressing in on me. The welcoming cathedral became a claustrophobic tomb. The image of her began to glitch and distort like a bad signal, flickering between the girl I loved and the monstrous entity that had scratched my arms and whispered horrors. The initial beam behind her seemed to pulse with a dark light. This was the truth. The peaceful reunion was a lie, a final, sophisticated trick to lure me into the same despair that had claimed her. The tradition wasn't about friendship. It was about corruption, about spreading its misery like a virus. She didn't want my company. She wanted my soul. A surge of primal defiance, a will to live I thought had been utterly extinguished, roared back to life. I looked at the phone, at the word Mom, and I thought of the clean apartment, the lying letters on the table, the tidy story I had almost completed. I thought of the real world, with all its messy, painful, beautiful complexity. I took another step back, away from the beckoning hand. No, Rara, I whispered, my voice raw but firm. I can't. The entity that wore her face let out a silent scream of fury that I felt rather than heard, a psychic shockwave that made the old beams of the loft shudder. The pleasant illusion dissolved completely, revealing the raw, hungry malice that had been hiding beneath it all along. It wasn't my friend. It was the thing that had taken her, and it wanted me too. I turned and practically fell down the ladder, scrambling backward on the floor, never taking my eyes off the black opening above me. The pull cord retracted with a sharp whipping sound, and the loft door slammed shut with a finality that shook the whole house. The oppressive presence didn't vanish, but it receded, coalescing back into that space, a contained storm of bitterness. I ran. I burst out into the cold night air, gasping, the reality of what I had almost done crashing down on me. I was alive. I had chosen to be. The haunting wasn't over, I knew that. The scratches might fade,
but the scars on my soul were permanent. But as I drove away, the first hints of dawn painting the horizon, the ghost in the rearview mirror felt a little less powerful, a little more distant. The tradition had been broken. I had refused the invitation. The rest of my life would be a negotiation with that darkness, but for the first time since her death, it was a life I was fighting to keep.